Hello, I'm Peter. I'm so glad you could join me for tonight's journey.
With Christmas 2025 softly approaching, there's a special kind of magic lingering in the air, isn't there? I hope the warmth of the season is already finding its way to you like a gentle hug on a cold day. But amidst the festive lights and the turning of the calendar, I want to pause and ask you something. How was your day? What's weighing on your mind as you settle in tonight? Perhaps there's a worry that won't quite let go, a tension in your shoulders, or simply the restless energy of a long day that needs somewhere to rest. Whatever brought you here, whatever kept you awake, I want you to know this space is for you. Imagine, just for a moment, shedding the constant hum of electricity that surrounds you, the notifications, the traffic, the relentless pace. Instead, try to recall the feeling of stepping into a warm bath after being caught in a freezing rain. That contrast, that relief, is where we are going tonight. Tonight, we're going to step away from all of that. Together, we'll travel back through time to a winter that was harder than most of us can imagine, yet somehow filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with thermostats or central heating. If you're finding comfort in what we do here, if this journey feels right, take a moment now to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if it genuinely speaks to you. And please, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I love imagining you out there, whether you're in Tokyo as the sun rises, London as evening falls, or somewhere in the American heartland in the deep of night. We're building something together here, a community of people who find peace in history, who understand that the past has something to teach us about endurance, about kindness, about the small acts that keep us human when everything else grows cold. Now, dim the lights if you haven't already. Maybe adjust your pillow, pull your blanket a little closer. Let your breath slow down. We're about to step into a world where Christmas wasn't what you might imagine. A world where December 25th wasn't yet a federal holiday. Where survival through winter mattered more than celebration. Where the cold was so absolute that every warm moment had to be earned through labor, foresight, and the quiet grace of human kindness. This is history to fall asleep to, but it's also history that reminds us who we are. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1848. The place could be anywhere across the growing expanse of the United States. And the cold? Well, the cold is the kind that modern heating has made us forget was even possible. Picture this. It's 3 days before Christmas, and you're standing outside a rough-hewn cabin somewhere in the Ohio Valley. The temperature has dropped to 15 degrees below zero, cold enough that your breath doesn't just fog, it crystallizes in the air before your face, creating tiny ice needles that catch the weak winter sunlight. This is winter survival skill at its most fundamental. The kind of cold where mistakes don't just make you uncomfortable, they can end your story entirely. Listen closely to the sound of this cold. It is not silent. In the deep woods surrounding the cabin, the sap inside the ancient maple and oak trees is freezing, expanding with a violence that defies nature. Every hour or so, you hear a sound like a rifle shot. Crack! echoing through the valley. It is the sound of a tree trunk splitting open from the inside, the wood shattering under the pressure of the freeze. This phenomenon, known to pioneers as frost cracking, creates a terrifying soundtrack to the solitude. It is nature itself screaming under the pressure. And beneath that sharp crack, there is the silence. A silence so heavy, so profound, that you can hear the blood rushing in your own ears. This silence is psychological as much as it is physical. In 1848, there is no hum of distant traffic, no airplane overhead. The isolation is total. For the pioneers, this silence could induce a specific kind of anxiety, a fear that the world had forgotten them. To stand outside in this vast, white emptiness is to feel remarkably small, fragile, and temporary. It forces the mind inward, making the need for human connection not just a preference, but a desperate biological hunger. The wind moving through the valley isn't just air, it's a physical assault. It carries a low, hollow moan, a sound that seems to originate from the earth itself. When it hits the corner of the cabin, it whistles a high, dissonant note, seeking purchase, seeking entry. You can hear the timbers of the cabin groaning in response. A wooden ship sailing through a frozen ocean. The snow under your boots doesn't crunch. It squeaks. A high-pitched protest of dry powder compressed against frozen earth. If you were to take a glove off right now, the pain would be immediate. Not a chill, but a burn. The moisture on your skin would turn to ice in seconds, pulling the skin tight, stinging like 1,000 red ants. Your nostrils stick together when you inhale. The fluid in your eyes feels thick and sluggish. This is what 19th century diaries often described as the White Death. A settler in 1840 wrote, "The ink freezes in my pen before I can finish a sentence. I sit by the fire, yet my back is numb, and the water in the bucket just 3 feet away has a rim of ice." This is a cold that feels predatory. A living thing that is waiting for the fire to die down, waiting for a door to be left unlatched. It is the ever-present antagonist in the story of every family living in the 1800s American Christmas season. Forget the Norman Rockwell paintings. Forget the cosy Victorian parlours with their gaslit chandeliers and tables groaning under the weight of roasted goose and plum pudding. Forget what you think you know about Christmas in 19th century America from the movies and illustrated cards. Those images exist, yes, but they tell the story of maybe 5% of the population. The wealthy merchants and established city dwellers whose Christmases made it into paintings and literature. For the vast majority, Christmas in 1800s America was something else entirely. It was a test. But within that test, there was a profound psychological resilience. We often pity our ancestors for their lack of comfort, but we rarely credit them for their immense emotional fortitude. They possessed an acceptance of nature's cruelty that we have lost. They did not view the cold as an injustice, but as a fact, a backdrop against which their love and labour shone brighter. Before 1870, when Congress finally declared it a federal holiday, Christmas existed in a strange liminal space in American culture. In New England, the Puritan legacy still cast its long shadow. Schools and shops stayed open on December 25th. Ministers preached against the celebration as papist foolishness, a remnant of Catholic excess that had no place in a proper Protestant republic. In the South, plantation owners hosted elaborate parties that lasted for days, but beneath the surface gaiety lay the profound moral wrong of human bondage that would soon tear the nation apart.
On the frontier, Christmas was whatever you could make of it with what you had, which was often very little. And in the cities, the day belonged to rowdy crowds of young men who roamed the streets demanding food and drink from wealthier households, a tradition that made the upper classes increasingly nervous. But everywhere, in every region and every social class, there was one constant: the cold. This was before reliable home heating, before insulated walls, before weather forecasting could tell you that a blizzard was coming so you could prepare. This was a time when winter survival skill meant something visceral and immediate. It meant knowing how to bank a fire so it would last the night. It meant understanding that if you let yourself sweat while working outside, that moisture could freeze your underclothes to your skin and kill you with hypothermia before you made it back to shelter. It meant recognizing the signs of frostbite before you lost fingers or toes. It meant rationing firewood because you had to make it last until spring, and spring was still 4 months away. The problem we're exploring tonight isn't just how people celebrated Christmas in the 1800s. It's how they survived the winter at all. And within that survival, how they managed to create moments of warmth, connection and, yes, even joy, when everything around them was working to freeze them solid. So as you lie there in your warm bed, in your climate-controlled room, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine that the heating in your home has been off for 3 days. Imagine that there's no prospect of it coming back on, not tomorrow, not next week, not until April. Imagine that every degree of warmth in your space has to be earned through physical labour. Cutting wood, hauling it inside, building and maintaining a fire that can never go completely out, because starting it again from nothing in this cold would be nearly impossible. Imagine that the food you'll eat for the next 4 months is only what you managed to preserve, grow, or hunt before the snow came. Imagine that your nearest neighbour is half a mile away and the road between you is buried under 3 feet of snow. Now imagine trying to celebrate Christmas in the middle of all that. That's the journey we're taking tonight. And throughout this journey, we will constantly find ourselves returning to a single haunting question. How did they endure this winter? Not just physically, but spiritually. How did they withstand a season where the cold was not merely a weather condition, but a predator waiting at the door, a relentless force seeking to drain the life from their home? It wasn't through magic, it wasn't through luck, and it certainly wasn't through the technology we rely on today. It was through 1,000 silent gestures, small acts of defiance against the freeze. It was the father battling the biting wind, his face wrapped in wool, trudging through waist-deep drifts to chop the wood that would stand between his family and death. It was the mother, waking 3 times in the blackest part of the night, leaving the warmth of the quilts to feed the fire, acting as the keeper of the flame when the world wanted nothing more than to extinguish it. It was the neighbour, trekking miles across frozen fields, risking frostbite just to share a single piece of cake or a cup of sugar. An act that said, "We are still here. We are not forgotten." These people were fighting a war against the elements, and their weapons were not swords, but patience and care. They constructed a fragile warmth, a tiny bubble of habitability in a hostile universe. This warmth they created, this warmth we will talk about tonight, was more than just temperature. It was a symbol of spiritual survival. It was the physical manifestation of love in its most primal, protective form. When you visualize this, don't just see a cozy fire. See the exhaustion behind the fire. See the fear of the woodpile running low. See the triumph of waking up to a warm hearth in a world that froze solid overnight. The endurance of the 1800s family was a masterpiece of human will, built not on grand speeches, but on the quiet, uncelebrated determination to simply keep the cold at bay for 1 more hour, 1 more night, 1 more season. This struggle is the canvas upon which their Christmas was painted, making every splash of colour and every note of song infinitely more vibrant against the white, silent backdrop of the winter. The cold is coming. Can you feel it starting to seep in around the edges of this story? Let's step closer to the fire. You push open the door of a farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania, and the first thing that hits you isn't warmth. Not yet. It's smoke. Wood smoke, thick and acrid, hangs in layers near the ceiling. Your eyes water immediately. This is normal. This is winter. In the 1800s, the air inside most homes during the cold months was only marginally clearer than the air outside during a forest fire. Ventilation was the enemy of heat. Every crack sealed meant more smoke stayed in, but it also meant life-saving warmth stayed in. Chimneys were crude affairs, often built by the homeowners themselves, and they rarely drew properly. The smoke had to go somewhere, so it filled the upper portions of rooms, hovering there like a permanent fog bank. People learned to live beneath it, learned to keep their heads down, learned that smoke in your lungs was better than cold in your bones. It was a constant, gritty taste in the back of your throat, a smell that permeated your hair, your clothes, and your bedding until spring. To breathe in this house is to breathe the very fuel that keeps you alive. The room you're standing in is perhaps 15 feet by 20 feet. This is the main living space of the house. Everything happens here. Cooking, eating, working, sleeping, living. And yes, in a few days, whatever Christmas celebration this family manages will happen here too. The ceiling is low, maybe 7 feet at its highest point, to conserve heat. The walls are log, chinked with mud and moss, but you can see daylight through some of the gaps. Later today, someone will mix up a paste of mud and old newspapers, heating it slightly to make it pliable, and press it into those cracks.
It's a never-ending battle. The house breathes with the wind. The cold finds every weakness.
It creeps in along the floorboards.
A draught so distinct you can feel it circling your ankles like icy water. Families often nailed old rugs or heavy wool blankets over the doors and windows, creating layers of insulation. But the cold always found a way. It would condense on the heads of iron nails inside the wall, forming perfectly round beads of white frost that looked like pearls, a deceptive beauty that signalled the failure of the wall's insulation. In the centre of the room, dominating everything, is the fireplace. It's massive by modern standards, perhaps 5 feet wide and 4 feet tall, made of fieldstone mortared together. This single opening is responsible for keeping 6 people alive through the winter. Right now, a fire burns there, but it's smaller than you might expect. They're conserving wood. The family has calculated exactly how many cords they'll need to make it to spring, and they're already behind. A cold snap in November depleted their reserves.
So the fire stays small, just enough to keep the room above freezing, just enough to cook on. At night, it will be banked, buried under ash to hold the coals until morning. The warmth from the fire doesn't radiate evenly. Stand 3 feet from the flames and your face might be almost hot. Stand 6 feet away and you're cold. Stand 10 feet away, back near the wall, and your breath fogs. The family has learned to live in layers, always aware of thermal zones within their own home. The children play near the fire. Adults work closer to the walls, where the colder air sharpens their alertness. At night, everyone will sleep in this room. Beds and pallets arranged in concentric circles around the hearth, with the youngest closest to the coals. Let's linger on the sleeping arrangements, for this was a critical piece of winter survival skill. The beds themselves were not merely furniture. They were engineered systems for heat retention. The mattress was likely a tick, a large fabric bag filled with corn husks, straw, or, if they were fortunate, goose feathers. In winter, this mattress was fluffed high to create dead air space, trapping body heat from below. But the real secret lay in the bed key or bed wrench. The ropes supporting the mattress would sag over time. Before the cold set in, the father would use a wooden tool to tighten these ropes until they hummed like guitar strings, ensuring the sleepers were held high off the cold drafts of the floor. Before climbing into bed, a ritual occurred: the warming of the sheets. A long-handled brass or copper pan filled with hot coals from the fire was slid between the icy layers of wool and linen. It was moved quickly to prevent scorching, leaving behind a toasted, smoky warmth that would last just long enough for the sleeper to fall asleep. The children often slept 3 or 4 to a bed, spooning together. This wasn't just due to lack of space. It was thermal necessity. A lone sleeper in 1848 was a cold sleeper. They practiced bundling, wrapping themselves in flannel nightgowns and heavy caps, for up to 40% of body heat is lost through the head. To sleep in this era was to surrender to a cocoon of weight. Heavy quilts, wool blankets, sometimes even animal pelts like buffalo or bear skin were piled on top until the sheer pressure was a comforting presence in the dark. Imagine this thermal map: a bullseye of life in the center, fading rapidly to the lethal cold of the corners. The corners of the room are essentially refrigerators, where ice can form in a wash basin even while the fire burns.
This physical layout forced a psychological closeness that we rarely experience today. There was no going to your room to be alone. Privacy was a luxury they could not afford. This lack of personal space created a family dynamic of intense interdependence.
You knew the sound of your father's breathing as he slept. You knew the exact rhythm of your mother's footstep on the packed earth. Touch was a constant language, a hand on a shoulder, bodies pressed together on a bench, not just for affection, but for survival, to share body heat. In this small, smoky room, the emotional atmosphere was as tangible as the smoke. If there was anger, it had to be resolved, for there was nowhere to go. If there was grief, it was shared instantly. This forced intimacy forged bonds of steel, creating a collective self where the individual ego had to soften for the group to survive. Look around, and you'll see how utterly foreign this space is to our modern understanding of home. There are no separate rooms in the sense we know them. Privacy doesn't exist. There's a loft above reached by a ladder where older children sleep, but it's bitterly cold up there. Frost forms on the inside of the roof boards. In the morning, you can scrape it off with your fingernail. Some nights, the water in the wash basin left upstairs will freeze solid. So even though the loft is technically available, on the coldest nights everyone retreats downstairs to the room with the fire, and they pile together for warmth the way humans have done since the Ice Age. The windows are small, just 2 of them, each about 2 feet square. Glass was expensive, so what's installed is thin and wavy, full of bubbles and imperfections. Heavy wooden shutters can be closed over them from the inside. During the worst cold snaps, the shutters stay closed for days at a time. The family lives in dimness, in firelight and shadow, in a permanent twilight that plays tricks on your sense of time. Is it noon? Is it evening? Inside it's always the same. Smoke, shadows, and the quiet roar of wind outside. The floor is packed earth, covered in places with rough planks. The planks are arranged near the fire, where people walk most often, to keep the mud down. In winter, the earth floor is actually an advantage. It never gets warm, but it also never gets cold enough to hurt your feet the way stone or wood might. It's simply neutral. Women scatter pine needles or straw over it, which helps with the smell and provides a little cushioning. But by midwinter, it's matted down and needs to be swept out and replaced. Against one wall stands the one piece of substantial furniture, a large wooden table, hand-hewn from local timber. It's scarred and stained, the surface darkened by decades of meals and work. Run your hand over it in your mind. Feel the ridges of the grain raised by years of scrubbing with sand and water. This table is an altar of survival. Around it are rough benches and a few stools. This is where the family will gather for their Christmas meal in a few days, however modest it might be. This is where the mother works during the day, kneading bread, mending clothes, preparing vegetables. This is where the father sits in the evening to work on tool repairs by firelight. This table is the center of domestic life, second in importance only to the fire itself. There's a smell to this place that's hard to describe, but impossible to ignore. Smoke, yes, always smoke. But also wood, damp wool, root vegetables, rendered fat, and the subtle funk of humans living in very close quarters with inadequate bathing for months at a time.
It's not entirely unpleasant, this smell. It's earthy and alive, the smell of survival, the smell of winter life concentrated and turned inward. In one corner, hanging from the rafters, you see food storage. Strings of dried apples, loops of sausage, bundles of dried herbs. There's a barrel of salted pork, another of flour, another of cornmeal.
These barrels represent calculations made back in October. How much will we need? How much can we afford? How much can we store? Get the calculations wrong and the family starves in March when winter is at its longest and the barrels at their emptiest. This is winter survival skill at the level of mathematics and planning, where every pound of flour is accounted for, where waste is simply not an option. Near the fire, a large black pot hangs from a crane, an iron arm that swings in and out of the flames. Inside the pot, something is always cooking. During winter, it's often a perpetual stew, a mixture that's added to daily, never completely emptied, constantly evolving. Beans, salt pork, turnips, onions if they're available, sometimes a bone for flavour. It bubbles quietly all day, filling the house with steam and scent, providing hot food whenever someone is hungry or cold enough to need it. This pot is a form of heating as much as cooking. The steam it produces adds moisture to the dry winter air and carries warmth to every corner of the room. You walk closer to the fire, and the woman of the house nods at you without speaking. She's perhaps 35, though she looks older. Her hands are red and chapped, her face weathered. Look closely at her hands. They tell the story of the frontier. The knuckles are swollen from the cold and the endless scrubbing. The skin is rough, etched with the maps of 1,000 chores. Yet there is a gentleness in how she touches her children, a tenderness that seems impossible given the harshness of her labour. Her face, framed by a simple cap, shows lines of worry around the eyes, the prairie squint from looking into the sun and snow, but also deep laugh lines. She is beautiful, not in the porcelain doll fashion of the magazines, but with the fierce, enduring beauty of a weathered oak tree. She's wearing multiple layers, skirts over petticoats, a heavy wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Even inside, next to the fire, she's dressed for cold. She never really gets warm in winter, hasn't been truly warm since November, won't be warm again until May. She's accepted this. She is the archetype of the silent caregiver, a guardian of the thermal threshold. She moves with a quiet, efficient grace that belies the exhaustion in her bones. She is the one who wakes before the dawn, not to seek comfort, but to ensure it exists for others. She is the one who runs her hands along the rough-hewn logs of the walls, her fingertips sensitive to the slightest draught, finding the invisible enemies where the wind whispers through. When she mixes the mud to chink the walls, it is an act of intimate protection. She presses the cold, wet clay into the gaps with bare hands, her skin reddening and cracking against the chill, sacrificing the integrity of her own hands to seal the integrity of the home. She is the one who sacrifices sleep, lying awake to listen to the breathing of the fire, terrified that if she drifts off too deeply, the embers might die, and the cold will seize the room.
You can feel her presence in every corner of this habitat, in the smell of dried herbs she hung to ward off sickness, in the warmth of the stones she heated in the fire to wrap in cloths and place at her children's feet. You can almost sense the texture of her skin, roughened by labour and dry air, rubbing against the coarse wool of her apron. You can hear her breathing, heavy, rhythmic, determined, as she lifts the heavy iron pot or carries the wood. She is the living insulation of this house, the human barrier between her family and the indifference of the winter. She turns this draughty, smoke-filled, fragile wooden box into a sanctuary. Not with magic, but with the relentless, silent expenditure of her own life force. Her body has learned to function in a state of constant mild cold. It's exhausting, this slow leak of body heat. But it's survival. 2 children play near the fire, a boy of perhaps 8 and a girl of 6. They're building something with scraps of wood and twine, some kind of toy. Their breath doesn't fog here near the flames, but their cheeks are still red from being outside earlier. They've learned to stay close to the fire, to hoard warmth. They know, even at their age, that cold is dangerous. They've been taught that frostbite starts with tingling, then numbness, then a waxy white appearance to the skin. They check their fingers and toes regularly, wiggling them, making sure sensation remains. This is winter survival skill passed from parent to child, a curriculum with no classroom, but dire consequences for those who fail. Outside, you can hear the wind. It's a constant presence, a low moan that never quite stops. Sometimes it gusts and the whole house shudders. Sometimes it drops and the silence is almost eerie. But mostly it just blows, hour after hour, day after day, through December and January and February and into March. The wind is what makes this cold so dangerous. The temperature might be 15 degrees, but with the wind, it feels like 15 below. Exposed skin freezes in minutes. Your lungs ache when you breathe. Your eyes water and the tears freeze on your cheeks. This is the habitat. This is the space where Christmas will be celebrated, where life continues despite everything. It's not cozy in the way we imagine. It's not comfortable. It's survival with moments of warmth carved out by relentless effort. The fire must be fed. The food must be cooked. The cold must be fought, constantly, without rest. Because the moment you stop fighting it, it wins. But here's what you need to understand. Within this harsh reality, within this daily struggle against the elements, people still found ways to make life beautiful. They still sang. They still told stories. They still looked forward to Christmas, not as an escape from their hardship, but as a brief moment when the hardship could be acknowledged and, just maybe, softened by community and tradition. The warmth in this room isn't a given. It's an achievement. And every person here knows it. There's a phrase you'll hear again and again if you read the letters and diaries of 1800s Americans. The work never stops. And nowhere is this more true than in the days leading up to Christmas in a rural household. It's December 22nd. Christmas is 3 days away. But those 3 days won't be spent in leisure.
they'll be spent in frantic preparation. Because Christmas dinner doesn't cook itself, and winter doesn't pause just because there's a holiday coming. But there is another shadow that hangs over the house, darker than the smoke, colder than the wind. Sickness. In the 1800s, winter was the season of the lung fever, pneumonia, croup, and consumption, tuberculosis. The sealed-up houses, with their recirculated smoky air and close quarters, were breeding grounds for respiratory illness. Every cough from a child sent a spike of terror through the parents. There was no pharmacy to run to at midnight.
The nearest doctor was hours away by horse, likely impossible to reach in deep snow. The mother, therefore, had to be the doctor. Her pantry was her apothecary. Dried mullein leaves for coughs, mustard seeds ground into a paste for chest congestion, goose grease to be rubbed on throats, onions roasted and wrapped in flannel as a poultice to draw out infection. Imagine the sound of a child coughing a barking, hacking cough in the dead of night. The mother rises instantly, her feet finding the cold floor. She stirs the coals, heating a kettle. She makes a tea of slippery elm bark or honey and vinegar. She sits by the bedside, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows, listening to the rattle of the child's breathing. This vigil is the ultimate labour of love. It is a battle fought in inches, with warmth and herbs, against the crushing weight of winter illness. The fear is palpable. The fear that a simple cold will turn into the white plague that leaves an empty chair at the table. This fragility of life made the coming Christmas even more poignant. If everyone was healthy on Christmas morning, that health itself was the greatest gift, far surpassing any trinket or toy. The day starts before dawn. In winter, this means starting in darkness that feels absolute. There are no streetlights bleeding through curtains, no clock radios playing soft music, no gradual warming from a thermostat set to kick on at 5:30 a.m. There is only cold and darkness and the necessity of fire. The father wakes first. He has to. The fire has been banked overnight, buried in ash to preserve the coals, but it's mostly died. The room temperature has dropped to perhaps 40 degrees, cold enough that everyone's breath fogs, cold enough that frost has formed on the inside of the windows. He rises from the family bed, wrapping a quilt around his shoulders, and kneels before the fireplace. This is a critical moment. If the coals have died completely, starting the fire from scratch will be difficult and time-consuming. Flint and steel can do it, but in cold conditions, with numb fingers, it might take 20 minutes of striking before a spark catches. He prays silently as he rakes aside the ash. Please let there be coals. His breath comes in visible clouds. His fingers ache within seconds. There, a dull red glow beneath the ash. Relief floods through him. He feeds the coals carefully, first with the finest tinder, dry grass and wood shavings saved for exactly this purpose. A breath of air, gentle, coaxing. A small flame licks up. He adds slightly larger pieces, pine splinters that catch quickly. More breath. The fire begins to build. He adds kindling, then small logs, then finally a proper piece of firewood. The whole process takes perhaps 10 minutes, but by the end, flames are dancing and the terrible cold of the room begins slowly,
to retreat. This is winter survival skill at its most basic. Making fire, keeping fire, never losing fire. In some households, the fire hasn't gone out completely in years. It's maintained through summer and winter, banked low when fuel is scarce, built high when there's wood to spare, but never allowed to die. Because fire is life, and life without fire in winter is measured in hours. Consider the chemistry of their cleanliness, another winter survival skill. Washing clothes in winter was a Herculean task that women often dreaded. Water had to be hauled from a frozen creek or well, often requiring an axe to break the ice. It was heated over the fire in heavy copper boilers. Their soap was homemade, a harsh mixture of rendered animal fat, tallow, and lye leached from wood ashes. It was soft, brown, and smelled faintly of bacon. Scrubbing heavy woolens and linens in steaming water while the air in the room was freezing created a localized humidity that coated the walls in sweat. The women's hands would be red, raw, and cracked, the lye biting into the fissures caused by the cold. Drying the clothes was even harder. They couldn't be hung outside to freeze into stiff boards. They had to be draped around the interior of the cabin, festooning the living space with damp fabric that slowly released moisture, smelling of wet wool and lye, adding to the sensory density of the habitat. As the room warms from bone-numbing to merely uncomfortable, the rest of the family begins to stir. The mother rises, adds water to the ever-present pot over the fire, begins preparing breakfast. It will be simple. Cornmeal mush, perhaps with a little molasses if they're lucky, a piece of salt pork for flavour. She works quickly, efficiently, her hands moving through routines so familiar she could do them blind. There's no coffee. Coffee is expensive, a luxury. There might be chicory or roasted grain mixed with hot water, a bitter drink that provides warmth if not actual energy. The children eat quickly. Then the boys bundle up to go outside. There are animals to tend. A milk cow, a few chickens, maybe a pig. Let's step into the barn with them. It is a sensory shock of a different kind. The barn is darker than the house, smelling of ammonia, hay and manure. But it is also warm, surprisingly so. The body heat of the animals trapped in the smaller space of the stalls raises the temperature. The milk cow is a living radiator. When the boy leans his forehead against her flank to milk her, he feels the immense, steady warmth of her large body. The steam from the fresh milk rises in a sweet-smelling cloud, warming his face. The animals are not just food sources, they are fellow travellers in the winter. The boys talk to them, murmuring reassurances. They check the chickens' combs for frostbite, rubbing them with grease if they turn white. This daily communion with the beasts teaches empathy. They see the animals shivering. They see the vulnerability of all living things. It reinforces the duty of stewardship. If the cow freezes, the family starves. The survival of the human is inextricably linked to the survival of the animal. Meanwhile, the father is preparing to go into the woods. They need more firewood, always more firewood. The stack that looked adequate in November has dwindled faster than anticipated. A cold snap, a poorly sealed door, a night when they allowed the fire to burn a little hotter because everyone was shivering. These things add up. Now, 3 days before Christmas, he's heading out to cut more, to haul more, to stack more. This is back-breaking work in summer. In winter, it's agonizing. The cold makes his joints ache. The physical labor makes him sweat,
and the sweat freezes against his skin beneath his layers of clothing. He has to be careful not to overexert, not to injure himself, because a twisted ankle or a gashed hand now could be catastrophic.
There's no hospital. The nearest doctor might be 20 miles away over impassable roads. An injury now means suffering through it, hoping infection doesn't set in, hoping weakness doesn't follow. But the wood must be cut. So he goes. He swings the axe, the sound sharp and brittle in the frozen air. Every strike sends a jolt through his arms, vibrating in his cold, stiffened bones. He is not just gathering fuel, he is buying time. Every log he drags back is another hour of safety for his children, another hour where the frost stays on the outside of the window. Back in the house, the mother begins the most important preparation of all, baking for Christmas. This is where the holiday starts to take shape, in the rhythmic work of mixing and kneading and shaping. She's making cookies, simple affairs of flour, molasses and whatever spices she has. Ginger, if she's fortunate, though ginger comes from far away and costs dearly. More likely, she's using dried mint from her summer garden, or cinnamon hoarded from last year's trading trip to town. The work is meditative. Flour dusts her hands and apron. The dough is stiff and cold, the fat in it barely soft enough to mix. She shapes the cookies by hand, no fancy cutters, just practiced fingers forming them into rough circles. They go onto a flat iron pan and into a Dutch oven nestled in the coals of the fire. Baking in a fireplace is an art form. Too close to the flames and the bottom burns while the top stays raw. Too far and nothing cooks. She's done this 1,000 times, knows by sight and smell when to rotate the pan, when to pull it out. The cookies emerge golden brown, filling the house with a smell that's almost unbearably beautiful. The smell of sweetness in the dead of winter. These cookies represent something profound. They're made from stores carefully preserved, from flour and sweetness and fat that could have been used for regular meals, but instead has been set aside, sacrificed, saved for this moment. In an economy of scarcity, this is an act of faith. Faith that they'll make it through winter. Faith that there will be enough. Faith that moments of joy are worth the cost in resources. This act of baking is also an act of defiance. It is a refusal to let survival be the only goal. It says, we are more than just animals seeking shelter. We are humans who require sweetness, who require celebration. The mother knows that the taste of these cookies will linger in her children's memories far longer than the memory of the cold. The daughter, the girl of 6, is helping. She's learning these skills the way her mother learned them, the way her grandmother learned them, through observation and practice. She's shaping her own small cookies, misshapen and clumsy, but received by her mother with genuine praise. This is education happening, the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. She is learning that love is an action. It is the kneading of dough when your knuckles are swollen. It is the patience to watch the coals. She is learning the survival skill of creating joy. This is how winter survival skill becomes culture, how coping mechanisms become traditions. By midday, the father returns with a load of wood lashed to a rough sled. His face is red with cold and exertion.
Ice has formed in his beard from his frozen breath. He stamps snow from his boots, adds the wood to the stack, and comes inside. His fingers are white at the tips, the beginning of frostbite. His wife immediately guides his hands into a basin of lukewarm water. Not hot water. Hot would damage the tissue, but lukewarm, to slowly bring feeling back. He grimaces as circulation returns.
The pain of thawing frostbite is distinct and memorable. This moment right here, this quiet tending to a frozen spouse, is a small but profound sacrifice. It is a ritual of pain and relief that defines their marriage in the winter months. He does not complain about the agony of the blood returning to the capillaries, a sensation like 1,000 hot needles piercing the skin. She does not complain about the interruption of her work or the fatigue of her own body. There is a deep, unspoken language in this interaction. They do not need to say, "I love you," in the modern way. The love is in the basin of water. It is in the way she dries his hands with a rough towel, careful but firm. It is in the way he looks at her, exhausted but grateful, seeing in her not just a wife, but a partner in the truest, hardest sense of the word. They are soldiers in the same trench, and their loyalty to one another is absolute. This bond, forged in the crucible of winter, is stronger than any romantic poetry. They are a collective, silent caregiver. Two halves of a survival engine that cannot afford to break down. As you watch them, you can almost feel the physical sensation of the scene. The throbbing ache in the man's fingertips shifting from numbness to searing fire, a sign of life returning where death tried to take hold. It is a condition known as chilblains, a painful inflammation that will plague him for the rest of the winter, an itching, burning reminder of the price paid for heat. You can smell the unique, sharp scent of fresh-cut oak and pine clinging to his clothes, mingling with the metallic tang of cold sweat that has frozen and is now beginning to melt in the warmth of the room. It is a raw, biological intimacy. He endures the pain so she can be warm. She tends to his wounds so he can continue the work. It is a reminder that in this era, warmth is never a default state. It is a prize. It is a reward wrested from the grip of the season through ceaseless, back-breaking work. Every degree of heat in that room is paid for in calories burned, in muscles strained, in the silent endurance of pain. But he says nothing. This is simply winter. This is the price of staying alive. In the afternoon, the family turns to another task: decorating. This is where Christmas begins to feel like more than survival, where the work transforms into something celebratory. They go out together, the whole family, into the woods behind the house. They're looking for evergreen branches, pine or fir or cedar, anything that stays green through winter. These branches will be brought inside and arranged around the room, bringing the smell of forest and life into the smoke-filled interior. It's a smell that speaks of continuity, of the promise that spring will come, that not everything dies in winter. Finding a young tree small enough to dig up or cut down is harder. They're not looking for the towering Christmas trees of later eras. They want something that will fit on the table. perhaps 3 feet tall. When they find one, the father cuts it carefully, leaving the stump so it might regrow. They carry it home in triumph, the children taking turns holding it. Back in the house, the tree is positioned on the table, secured in a bucket weighted with stones. Now comes the decoration, and here's where ingenuity and make-do spirit shine. There are no store-bought ornaments. Everything is created from what they have. Strings of popcorn and cranberries laboriously threaded on twine. Paper chains made from the coloured pages of old catalogues, carefully cut and glued with flour paste. Cookies shaped like stars hung from the branches with thread. If the family has candles to spare, a few small ones might be fastened to branches with melted wax. But they'll only be lit for a few precious minutes on Christmas Eve. Candles are expensive, and using them for decoration is almost wasteful. But the effect, the warm glow on faces gathered around the tree, is worth the cost. As evening falls, the father takes his oldest son out again, this time with the gun. They're hunting for Christmas dinner. With luck, they'll get a wild turkey or a goose. More likely, they'll settle for rabbits or squirrels, anything to supplement the salt pork that's been their protein all winter. Hunting in December is difficult. The animals are wary. The cold makes your hands shake, and the short daylight means you have limited time. But they try, because Christmas should be marked, should be different, should offer something beyond the daily routine of survival. They return at dusk with 2 rabbits. It's not much, but combined with the chicken the mother will sacrifice from their small flock, it will make a decent stew. There will be biscuits, precious and rare, made with the last of their butter. There will be the cookies. There will be, if everything works out, a sense of abundance, wrested from scarcity by sheer determination. That night, everyone is exhausted. The work of preparation, the work of simply staying alive, has drained them. But there's also a sense of accomplishment. They're ready. Christmas will come, and they'll be ready to meet it. The food is prepared, the decorations are up, the wood is stacked. As they settle into sleep, huddled around the banked fire, the mother allows herself a moment of hope. 3 more days. 3 more days of cold and work, and then a day of rest, of celebration, of reminding themselves why they endure. The work never stops, but sometimes, just sometimes, it pauses long enough to let a little light in. It's Christmas Eve now. The sun set 2 hours ago, and night has come to rural America with the weight and darkness of a physical thing. There's no light pollution here, no distant highway glow, no neighbour's porch light, not even a nearby town to cast a faint luminescence on the horizon. When night falls in December of 1848, it falls absolutely. The world outside the windows is a void so complete it seems hostile, a blackness that presses against the glass as if trying to get in. But inside is different. The fire has been built up tonight, higher than usual, because this is Christmas Eve. The family has decided to spend the extra wood to make this night special. Flames leap and dance, casting everything in flickering gold and shadow. The smoke is thick, but no one minds tonight. Tonight is for gathering, for being together, for creating warmth that's as much emotional as physical. The table has been pushed closer to the fire, and around it sit not just the immediate family, but 3 neighbours who've trudged through the snow to join them. In winter, in the American countryside of the 1800s, isolation is the norm. You might go days without seeing anyone outside your immediate household. So when a gathering happens, when people make the effort to come together, it's significant. It's a statement that community matters more than comfort, that connection is worth the risk of frozen ears and numb toes. Think about the sheer effort of this friendship. Today, we might cancel plans because of rain or fatigue. But these neighbours walked miles in sub-zero temperatures, wrapping their boots in burlap sacks for traction, risking their lives just to sit in this room. Why? Because the human soul withers in isolation, just as the body withers in the cold. To see another face, to hear a new voice, was a psychological necessity. When the door opened and the neighbours stepped in, bringing a gust of freezing air with them, they also brought the warmth of society. The handshake was firm, a gripping of life. The eye contact was deep, a silent check-in. You are still here. We are still here. The neighbours arrived at dusk, stamping snow from their boots, their faces red with cold. Their appearances are striking. The men have beards crusted with ice, their skin leathery and wind-burned, creating a map of the seasons they've endured. The women, though wrapped in layers of wool, have eyes that sparkle with the rare excitement of a social call. They smell of the cold outdoors, a scent of ozone and snow, mixing with the indoor smells of wood smoke and stew. They brought small gifts, a loaf of bread, a jar of preserved peaches, a small bottle of whiskey. These gifts are precious not because of their monetary value, but because they represent sharing in a time of scarcity. That jar of peaches was put up last August, was counted in the family's winter stores, was meant to last them until spring. To give it away now is an act of generosity that means something real. It says, I will risk going hungry in March so that we can feast together tonight. The mother serves the meal she's been preparing for 2 days. It's not fancy, but by winter standards, it's a feast. The chicken and rabbits have been stewed together with the last of the onions and carrots from the root cellar. The biscuits are golden and flaky, made with careful hands and real butter, a luxury saved for this occasion. There are the cookies from yesterday arranged on a wooden platter. There's hot cider made from apples dried last fall and rehydrated, spiced with cinnamon and cloves, sweetened with a tiny, precious amount of honey. The steam rises from the bowls, carrying the scent of meat and sage, a savoury perfume that activates saliva glands instantly in bodies used to bland, salted rations. As they eat, notice the pace. No one rushes. Each bite is savoured, turned over in the mouth, analysed for its flavour. In a world of limited stimulation, a good meal is a sensory explosion. They eat with a reverence that we, who can order food at any hour, have largely lost.
The sound of the meal is not just chewing, but the murmurs of satisfaction, the clinking of spoons against wooden bowls, the sound of contentment. As they eat, the conversation flows. News is shared, because news travels slowly here. Someone heard that the war with Mexico ended last year, though the details are vague. Someone else reports that a new family has moved into the old Carson place 5 miles north, immigrants from Germany who speak almost no English.
There's discussion of the winter, of how much snow has fallen, of whether the creek will flood when the thaw comes in March. These are the topics that matter: weather, neighbours, survival. The children eat quickly, then start to fidget. They know what's coming next. The stories. This is the heart of the evening, the part that makes Christmas Eve something more than just another cold night. The oldest neighbour, a man in his 60s with a beard gone grey, begins to tell a story. It's a tale from his childhood in Virginia about a Christmas long ago when he was a boy, about a snowstorm so severe that his family was trapped in their cabin for a week, about how they ran out of food and melted snow to drink, about how his mother kept them all singing to keep their spirits up. "We sang every song we knew," he says, his voice rough and low. "Church hymns, work songs, silly rhymes. My mother said that as long as we were singing, we weren't giving up." And on the 7th day, the storm broke, and my father managed to shoot a deer that had come down from the mountains looking for food. We made it through. But I learned something that week. I learned that sometimes all you have is each other and your voice. And sometimes, God help you, that's enough. The room is silent when he finishes. Even the children are quiet, understanding somehow that they've been told something important, something true. Then the father stands and retrieves his fiddle from where it hangs on the wall. It's not a fine instrument. The wood is scarred. One of the strings is catgut that he made himself, and it's almost always slightly out of tune. But when he draws the bow across the strings and begins to play, it doesn't matter. The sound fills the small room, bounces off the low ceiling, and suddenly they're not cold anymore, not isolated anymore. They're part of something larger, something that connects them to every other family gathered around fires across the vast winter landscape of America. He plays Barbara Allen, a ballad that came over from Scotland generations ago. Everyone knows it. The women join in first, their voices high and clear. Then the men add deeper harmonies. The children hum along, learning the tune. The song is sad, a story of love and loss. But there's something comforting in its familiarity, in the knowledge that their grandparents sang this same song, and their children will sing it too. More songs follow: Green Leaves, The Wayfaring Stranger, All Through the Night. These are the carols of their time, not the jolly Santa-focused songs of later eras, but older, sadder, more haunting melodies that speak of longing and hope in equal measure. Songs that acknowledge the darkness while insisting that light will return. But listen closer. The music is not just for merriment. In this context, melody becomes a weapon. It is a sonic shield raised against the silence and the cold lurking just on the other side of the plank door. It is a defiant assertion of life in a season that resembles death.
The music fills the void, pushing back the psychological weight of the winter night. And behind this wall of sound, operating in the shadows and the flicker of the firelight, are the silent caregivers. Watch the mother as she moves through the room. She is pouring hot cider, the steam rising in curls around her face. She places a mug into the trembling hands of a guest, watching their shoulders drop as the heat seeps into them. This act, this dispensing of liquid warmth, is her way of banishing the shivers that threaten to take hold. Look at the neighbour, the one who brought the whiskey. He pours a measure for the host, even though he knows his own winter stores are dangerously low. He shares not because he has plenty, but because he understands the spiritual necessity of the gesture. In the taste of that cider, sweet and spiced, and in the burn of that whiskey, there is a profound message. We are in this together. The food, the drink, the music, they are the ammunition of spiritual survival, deployed by these quiet guardians to ensure that when the sun rises tomorrow, everyone is not just alive, but still human. Between songs, someone tells a joke and everyone laughs. It's not a particularly funny joke, but laughter feels good, feels necessary. It's a form of defiance against the cold and the dark and the hardship. Laughter acts as a physical release, shaking the tension from the muscles. For a moment, the worry lines on the father's face smooth out. The mother's eyes brighten. In the chemistry of the brain, this shared laughter releases oxytocin, bonding the group together, making them feel safer, warmer, and more resilient than they ever could alone. The youngest child, a girl of 4, starts to nod off in her mother's lap. The mother hums softly, a lullaby, and the girl's eyes close. She's warm, she's full, she's surrounded by people she loves. In this moment, for her, the world is perfect. Around midnight, the gathering begins to wind down. The neighbours need to get home before the cold gets worse. They bundle up, layering on scarves and coats, preparing to step back out into the night. There are warm farewells, wishes for a blessed Christmas, promises to visit again when the roads clear in spring. After they leave, the family prepares for bed. But first, a moment of quiet ritual. The father reads from the family Bible, the Christmas story from the Gospel of Luke. His voice is slow and steady. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. The parallel isn't lost on anyone. A family seeking shelter in winter, finding warmth where they could, making do with what little they had. The story feels more real tonight than it might in a comfortable city church. Tonight they understand viscerally what it means to have no room at the inn, what it means to find shelter wherever you can. They pray together, thanking God for life, for health, for food and fire and family. They ask for protection through the rest of the winter. They ask for those who have less to be provided for. And then they settle into sleep, the children piled together near the fire, the parents in the larger bed against the wall. Outside, the wind howls. The temperature continues to drop. By morning, it will be 20 below zero, cold enough to crack tree trunks with sounds like gunshots. But inside, for now, there's warmth. Not the automated, thoughtless warmth of modern heating, but warmth that's been earned, created, maintained through constant effort.
Christmas Eve in the 1800s. America wasn't about presents under a tree or elaborate light displays. It was about this. Being together when being alone was dangerous. Sharing when you had little to share. Finding joy in songs and stories and the simple fact of survival. Creating light in the darkest season, not with electricity, but with human connection. As sleep takes them, one by one, they're content. They've made it to Christmas. That alone is something to celebrate. Let's pause here in this warm moment and step back to see the larger picture. Because Christmas in 19th century America was far more complex and varied than our single homestead can show. To truly understand what we're experiencing tonight, we need to widen our lens and look at how this holiday was evolving across a rapidly changing nation. First, an important fact that shapes everything. Christmas wasn't a federal holiday until June 26, 1870, when President Ulysses S. Grant signed legislation making it an official day off for federal employees in Washington, D.C. For most of the period we're discussing, Christmas had no legal standing. It was just December 25th, another day that might or might not be observed depending on your religious background, your geographical location, and your social class. This created a fascinating patchwork of traditions and attitudes across the country. In New England, where Puritan influence remained strong well into the 1800s, Christmas was viewed with suspicion, if not outright hostility. The Puritans had banned Christmas observance back in colonial times, considering it a Catholic corruption with no biblical basis. Although the bans had been lifted by 1800, the cultural attitude persisted. Schools and businesses remained open. Ministers preached ordinary sermons. The idea of making a fuss over December 25th was seen as foolish at best, possibly sinful at worst. Historian Stephen Nissenbaum notes that as late as 1870, some New England factories still required employees to work on Christmas Day, and anyone who objected risked being fired. Some diaries from Massachusetts reveal that the only acknowledgement of the day might be a slightly larger log on the fire or a silent, private prayer, while the machinery of industry groaned on outside. In the South, by contrast, Christmas was a major social event, particularly on large plantations. The holiday there could last from Christmas Eve through New Year's Day, a stretch of visiting, feasting, hunting, and general revelry. But we need to acknowledge the profound moral darkness underlying these celebrations. The institution of slavery. Enslaved people were sometimes given a few days of rest during Christmas, and slaveholders told themselves this proved their benevolence. But a few days of rest couldn't compensate for lives lived in bondage, and the jollity of plantation Christmases existed in stark, shameful contrast to the human suffering that made them possible. An enslaved woman named Harriet Jacobs wrote in her narrative about the complex dread of the holidays, the fear that families would be sold apart come New Year's Day, often called Heartbreak Day in the slave quarters. The festive sounds from the big house were often a cruel counterpoint to the anxiety gripping the cabins. In the growing cities of the North, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, a different kind of Christmas was emerging in the early 1800s, and it was chaotic. Working-class young men roamed the streets in rowdy groups, a tradition sometimes called wassailing, but which often resembled outright extortion. These groups would go to wealthy households and demand food, drink, and money. The threat of violence was implicit. Refuse, and your windows might be broken, your property damaged. The upper classes found this terrifying and began working actively to transform Christmas into something they could control. A domestic, family-centered holiday focused on children rather than street carnival. This transformation was driven by several factors. Writers like Washington Irving and Clement Clarke Moore created a new literary vision of Christmas as cozy, English-inspired, and safely contained within the home. The rising middle class, anxious to distinguish themselves from both the rowdy poor and the aristocratic rich, embraced this vision enthusiastically. The idea of Christmas as primarily for children, with gift-giving and Santa Claus and decorated trees, all of this emerged in this period as a way of channeling the dangerous energy of the holiday into something manageable. But perhaps nothing shaped American Christmas more than immigration. Between 1820 and 1870, millions of Europeans flooded into the United States, and they brought their Christmas traditions with them. Let's look at the numbers, for they tell a staggering story of displacement and hope. In the 1840s alone, over 1.7 million immigrants arrived in America. Nearly half were Irish, fleeing the catastrophic Great Famine that began in 1845.
Another large contingent was German, escaping political unrest and crop failures. These were not tourists. They were refugees of hunger and revolution. For the Irish family huddled in a Boston tenement, 1800s American Christmas was a day of solemn remembrance. They had left a land of starvation where green Christmas meant a graveyard. In America they found food, yes, but also prejudice and hard labor. Their Christmas was deeply religious, centered on the midnight mass. They would walk through the snow-choked streets of the city, often miles to crowded parish churches. The warmth they sought was the spiritual warmth of the Eucharist and the familiar cadence of the Latin liturgy. They would place a lighted candle in the window, a tradition from the old country meant to welcome the Holy Family, but in the New World, it also signalled to other Irish immigrants, "You are welcome here. We share your history."
For the German settlers moving into the Midwest, Ohio, Missouri, Wisconsin, Christmas was a more boisterous affair. They brought with them the Weihnachtsbaum, Christmas tree, a tradition that puzzled their Anglo-Saxon neighbours. Statistics from the 1850 census show that in cities like Cincinnati and St. Louis, Germans made up over 30% of the population. They didn't just assimilate, they transformed the landscape. They introduced the concept of Gemütlichkeit, a specific kind of cosy, cheerful belonging. A German father in 1848 might spend weeks carving intricate wooden toys or moulding marzipan, recreating the sensory memories of Bavaria or Saxony. Their Christmas was a fortress of culture, a way to say, we may be in a wilderness, but we are still German. These cultural pockets were vital survival mechanisms. They provided a psychological anchor in a chaotic new world.
But despite this dazzling array of cultural differences, despite the clash between the stern New Englander and the festive Southerner, between the established citizen and the newly arrived immigrant, every single group eventually faced the same fundamental reality. They all circled back to that one pressing question. How do we endure this winter? It didn't matter if you were a Puritan in Massachusetts, strictly rationing your firewood to show moral discipline, or a German immigrant in the Midwest weaving a wreath of evergreen to hang on a drafty door. The objective was the same. The cold was the great equalizer. In every tradition, the warmth that was created, whether through a solemn prayer or a raucous song, was always the result of sacrifice. It was never a default state. It was never given freely by the environment. Warmth was the product of collective labour, a shared defiance against the freezing temperatures.
The history of Christmas in this era is not just a history of ornaments and carols. It is a history of survival skills applied to the soul. It is the story of how diverse people, separated by language and belief, were united by the need to huddle together, to burn what they had gathered, and to create a centre of heat in a world of ice. There is a poignant universality here. Imagine the German mother in Ohio singing Stille Nacht to her child, tears in her eyes as she remembers her own mother back in Bavaria. Now imagine the Irish father in Boston telling stories of the old country to distract his children from the drafty tenement windows. They are separated by miles and culture, but they are united by a common human emotion, the ache of displacement and the fierce desire to create a sense of home, no matter where they are. Christmas became the vessel for this longing, a time when the memories of the past were allowed to sit at the table with the realities of the present. The Germans brought the Christmas tree. While German immigrants in Pennsylvania had been decorating trees since the early 1800s, the practice didn't spread widely until mid-century. A turning point came in 1850 when Godey's Lady's Book, the most influential women's magazine of the era, published an illustration of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert standing with their children around a decorated Christmas tree. The image had been adapted from an earlier British publication, but tellingly, the editors removed Victoria's crown and Albert's moustache, making them look like a respectable American middle-class family rather than royalty. This Americanization of the image gave permission to native-born Americans to adopt what had previously seemed like a foreign custom. These early trees weren't the huge floor-to-ceiling affairs we know today. They were often tabletop size, perhaps 2 or 3 feet tall. Decorations were entirely homemade. Strings of popcorn and cranberries, paper chains, cookies cut into shapes and hung with string. Perhaps a few small candles fastened to branches with melted wax or wire. The whole thing sounds charming until you remember that putting lit candles on a dry pine tree created a serious fire hazard. Many houses burned down because of Christmas tree fires, but the beauty of the sight, especially to children who rarely saw anything so magical, seemed worth the risk. Irish immigrants brought different traditions. The Christmas candle in the window to guide travellers, the practice of putting a special loaf of bread aside to be shared with the poor, certain carols and songs. Italian immigrants added their own customs, Scottish families their own. The result was a gradual blending and merging of traditions, a slow creation of something that would eventually become American Christmas, though that synthesis was still incomplete in 1870. One tradition that's worth exploring in detail: the use of natural cold as refrigeration. This is a winter survival skill that's hard for us to appreciate in our age of electric refrigerators and freezers. In the 1800s, winter cold was the only reliable way to preserve food.
Starting in November, families would place barrels of butter, milk, meat and other perishables on the north side of the house or in unheated outbuildings. The cold kept things fresh for months. Some families even dug pits in the ground, essentially natural freezers where they could store food below the frost line. The challenge came during temporary thaws. If temperatures rose above freezing for a few days, food would start to spoil. Families had to monitor the weather constantly, moving food to cooler spots or consuming things that were starting to go bad. This wasn't just inconvenient, it could mean the difference between making it through winter or going hungry in March when stores ran low.
Now, let's talk about something that might surprise you. Christmas wasn't particularly religious for many Americans during this period, at least not in the way we might expect. Yes, devout families attended church, and yes, the nativity story was known and told. But Christmas hadn't yet become the central Christian holiday it is today. Easter was considered far more important theologically. Christmas was often more social than spiritual, more about community and family than about explicit religious devotion. This started to change as the century progressed. Churches began to recognize that if they wanted to shape how Christmas was celebrated, they needed to offer their own programming. Christmas Eve services became more common. Sunday schools started having Christmas programs with children reciting Bible verses and singing carols.
The church was, in a sense, joining the battle for Christmas, trying to make sure that amid all the feasting and gift-giving and secular celebration, the religious meaning wasn't lost. There's one more historical context we need to address: class and economics. The Christmas experience varied enormously depending on wealth. For a wealthy merchant family in New York or Boston, Christmas might include imported luxuries, oranges from Florida, oysters from the coast, toys from Europe, bolts of fine fabric for new clothes. Their homes would be warm with coal-fired furnaces, well lit with expensive candles or even early gas lighting. Their celebrations would resemble what we think of as traditional Victorian Christmas. For a middle-class family, the kind we've been following tonight, Christmas was more modest but still marked. They might have a special meal, some small gifts, decorations made by hand.
They'd heat their homes with wood fires and make do with what they had. But they weren't desperate. For the poor, for immigrant families in urban slums or tenant farmers barely surviving, Christmas might pass almost unnoticed. There was no money for special food, no time off from work, if they could even find work, no surplus for gifts. For them, making it through winter at all was the achievement. Churches and charitable organizations would sometimes distribute food or small gifts to the poor at Christmas, acts of charity that helped but couldn't disguise the massive inequality in how the holiday was experienced. So when we talk about Christmas in 1800s America, we're not talking about one thing. We're talking about a spectrum of experiences shaped by region, religion, ethnicity, class, and individual circumstance. The homestead we've been visiting tonight represents just one point on that spectrum. Rural, middle class, northern, of English or Scots-Irish heritage, Protestant, but not rigidly so. Millions of others had radically different Christmases, or no Christmas at all. What united them, what connected even the most different experiences, was winter itself. Whether you were wealthy or poor, urban or rural,
Immigrant or native-born, December in America meant cold. It meant darkness. It meant the landscape sleeping under snow and everything alive huddled together for warmth. Winter survival skill wasn't just for frontiersmen. It was for everyone. You had to know how to keep warm, how to preserve food, how to recognize the signs of hypothermia or frostbite, how to keep your spirits up when the sun set at 4:30 in the afternoon and wouldn't rise again until nearly 8 the next morning. And in that universal experience of winter, Christmas began to take on a deeper meaning.
It became a marker, a way of measuring progress through the dark season. It said, "We've made it this far. We're still alive. We're still together. And if we can make it to Christmas, we can make it to spring." That's the historical landscape. That's the complicated, messy, beautiful, tragic context in which our story unfolds. Now let's narrow back in, back to our family, back to Christmas morning, and see what this day brings. Christmas morning arrives with a silence that's almost unnatural. The wind has stopped. The house feels eerily quiet without its constant howl. The father rises first, as always, and revives the fire. The room is brutally cold, perhaps 35 degrees. He works quickly, efficiently, breathing into his cupped hands to warm them enough to handle the wood. When the fire catches and begins to push back the cold, he notices something. It's snowing again. Not the violent blizzard of earlier in the week, but a gentle, steady snowfall. Large flakes drift down from an iron-grey sky. By the end of the day, there will be another 6 inches on top of the 2 feet already on the ground. The world outside is being buried, erased, transformed into a blank white page. But this is Christmas. The work of the day will be different, gentler. The animals still need care, the fire still needs tending, but there's an unspoken agreement. Today, we rest as much as possible. Today, we pause. As the family gathers for a breakfast of leftover biscuits and hot mush, let's talk about the technology of their survival. Because that's really what it is. Technology, even if it doesn't look like technology to our modern eyes. Every object in this room, every practice, every habit represents accumulated knowledge about how to stay alive in harsh conditions. Take the fireplace itself. It might seem simple, just a hole in the wall where you burn wood. But there's enormous sophistication in its design. The depth of the firebox, the angle of the back wall, the size of the flue, all of these affect how well it draws, how much heat it produces, how efficiently it uses fuel. A well-designed fireplace can heat a room with remarkably little wood. A poorly designed one will fill the room with smoke and still leave everyone cold. Many families in this era went a step further and built what's called a beehive oven into the back of the fireplace. A dome-shaped cavity that retained heat and could be used for baking even after the main fire died down. This extension of the fireplace's utility made it more than just a heat source. It became a complex tool for managing thermal energy across different timescales and purposes. Or consider the windows, those small glass panes that seem so inadequate. The size isn't accidental.
Large windows would lose too much heat. Small windows keep warmth in while still admitting some light. And when the cold gets truly severe, those heavy wooden shutters get closed, trading light for warmth, creating a cave-like interior where the family can huddle and wait for the weather to improve. The clothing everyone wears is technology too. Layering isn't just putting on multiple shirts, it's creating pockets of trapped air between fabric layers. And trapped air is one of the best insulators known. The women's multiple petticoats, the men's vests under coats, the wool socks worn 2 pairs at a time, all of this creates a microclimate around the body, a portable bubble of warmth that moves with you. Wool is particularly crucial. Wool remains warm even when wet, unlike cotton, which becomes dangerously cold when moisture gets in. A wool coat, wool pants, wool socks, these are the difference between survival and hypothermia when you're working outside in December. The sheep that provide this wool are as important to survival as the cow that provides milk or the chickens that provide eggs. They're not just livestock, they're partners in survival. Food preservation is another area where ingenuity shines. We've talked about using natural cold as refrigeration, but the techniques go beyond just putting things outside.
Smoking meat, for instance, isn't just about adding flavour. It's about creating a surface layer of chemicals that inhibit bacterial growth, allowing meat to last for months. The smokehouse behind the cabin, where sides of pork and beef hang in the aromatic haze of smouldering hickory, is essentially a biochemical laboratory where food is being transformed at a molecular level to resist decay. Salting works differently but achieves the same end. Pack meat in salt and the salt draws out moisture, creating an environment where bacteria can't thrive. The meat becomes hard, almost like leather, but it doesn't rot. When you want to use it, you soak it in water to rehydrate it and wash out excess salt. It's not fresh meat, not by a long shot, but it's protein in March when nothing is growing and hunting is still difficult. Drying is the simplest preservation method. Hang food in a dry place and let time and air remove the moisture. Apples become leathery rings.
Beans become hard little pebbles. Herbs crumble to powder. Everything shrinks. Concentrates becomes shelf-stable. Then in winter, you reconstitute what you need, soaking it in water until it plumps back up enough to use. Even the root cellar is sophisticated. It's not just a hole in the ground. It's dug to a specific depth where the temperature stays just above freezing year-round. Store your potatoes, turnips, carrots and onions. There, pack them in sand or straw to prevent them touching each other, and they'll last until spring. But you have to check them regularly, removing any that start to rot before they contaminate the others. One spoiled turnip can ruin an entire barrel through contact. Gift-giving on Christmas morning reflects this same ingenuity and make-do spirit. There are no factories producing toys, no stores filled with ready-made goods. Everything is handcrafted, usually from materials that already exist around the house. The father has carved a small wooden horse for his youngest daughter. It's simple, unpainted, but you can see the care in its shaping. The legs are delicate, the mane suggested with careful knife cuts. Hours went into this hours, stolen late at night after everyone else slept hours, when he was already exhausted from the day's work. But seeing her face light up when she receives it makes those hours worthwhile. She immediately begins trotting it across the table, making quiet, neighing sounds lost in her own imagination. There is a psychology to this object. To the child, it is a horse, but to the father, it is a tangible piece of his protection. He cannot be with her every moment, he cannot shield her from every cold wind, but he can give her this object that he made with his own hands. Every curve of the wood holds his intent, his love. It is a transitional object, a physical manifestation of the bond between them. When she holds it, she is holding his hand. For his son, he's made something more practical. A real knife small enough for an 8-year-old, but real nonetheless. With a horn handle and a blade, he forged himself from an old file. This is a significant gift, a recognition that the boy is old enough to start learning men's work. With this knife, he can learn to carve to prepare kindling to clean game. It's a tool, but it's also a rite of passage. The mother has sewn new shirts for both children from flour sacks. These sacks, once emptied of their contents, become fabric. She's washed them thoroughly to remove the flour dust, then cut and stitched them into serviceable clothing. The seams are straight and strong. The fit isn't perfect, but they'll wear these shirts for the next year until they're outgrown. She's even managed to embroider small flowers on the collars, a touch of beauty added to utility. For her husband, she's knitted new wool socks. They're thick and warm, made from yarn she spun herself from their sheep's wool. Creating these socks represented months of work, shearing the sheep in spring washing and carding the wool to align the fibers, spinning it into yarn on her wheel, then finally knitting through the fall. Each pair of socks is hundreds of hours of human labor, but that labor means warm feet, which means less risk of frostbite, which means he can keep working outside, which means the family survives. The socks are a gift, but they're also an investment in survival. For the adults, gifts are exchanged privately. He's made her a wooden butter paddle to replace one that cracked. She's sewn him a new shirt from fabric she's been hoarding for a year. These aren't romantic gifts in the modern sense, but they're deeply intimate. They represent knowledge of each other's needs, attention to each other's daily struggles, practical love expressed through practical objects. There's one more gift unexpected. The oldest neighbor who visited last night appears at mid-morning, carrying something wrapped in burlap. Inside are oranges, 3 of them impossibly exotic in this snowbound landscape. He bought them weeks ago at the trading post in town, spent more than he could afford, and has been hiding them in his own cold storage until Christmas. Oranges from distant Florida, carried here by a chain of boats and wagons, and human hands, each one a small miracle of commerce and transportation. Consider the silent caregiver in this scenario, the old neighbor. Think of the sacrifice required to bring this sphere of sunlight into a world of grey. He spent coin he could have saved. He walked through deep snow, his breath laboring in the freezing air just to deliver them. These oranges are not just fruit. They are a symbol of defiance against the monotony of winter survival. As the family peels them, the zest sprays a fine mist into the air, and suddenly the room smells not of smoke and sweat, but of citrus and sunshine. The flavor is a shock to the system, an explosion of sweet and tart that cuts through months of eating salted meat and root vegetables. You can taste the vibrancy, the sheer life contained in that juice. It dispels the blandness of the winter palate. But never forget, behind that burst of flavor is the freezing pain of the neighbor's silent journey. Behind the gift is the cold he endured to bring it here. The sweetness is amplified by the suffering that carried it. The family is overwhelmed. Oranges in December in rural Pennsylvania are almost mythical. They've heard of such things, but never expected to taste them. The mother slices them carefully, rationing them so everyone can have a piece. The taste is explosively bright after months of bland winter food. Sweet and acidic and complex, unlike anything else they've eaten since October. The children's faces show wonder. They'll remember this moment for the rest of their lives, the Christmas they had oranges. These gifts, these small exchanges revealed something important about Christmas in 19th century America. It wasn't about abundance. It wasn't about getting everything you wanted. It was about ingenuity, about creating something from very little, about the thought and effort, mattering more than the object itself. A hand-carved horse, a pair of hand-knit socks, 3 oranges carried through winter. These things represented hours of labor, careful planning sacrifice. They meant something because they cost something real. In our age of mass production and 2-day shipping, it's hard to grasp how precious these gifts were. We can buy nearly anything we want with a few clicks, but our ancestors had to make what they needed, and making it well enough to give as a gift required real skill. Every gift was unique, irreplaceable, imbued with the personality and effort of the maker. Today, we often stress about finding the perfect gift. But perhaps we can learn from them the perfection wasn't in the object, but in the time sacrificed to create it. In a way, giving a handmade gift was giving a piece of one's life, literally hours of existence, to another. That's the technology and ingenuity of survival. It's not flashy. It wouldn't impress us with its sophistication, but it worked. It kept people alive through winter after winter. And within that system of survival, people still found ways to create beauty, to mark special occasions, to give to each other. That's what makes it remarkable. Not that they survived, but that they survived while still remaining human, still caring about more than just getting through another day. The snow continues to fall outside. The fire crackles. The family sits together warm for now, fed for now, together for now. That's all Christmas is really. A moment of now carved out of the relentless pressure of survival. A small space of light and warmth in the long, cold winter. And it's enough. As the afternoon settles over our Pennsylvania homestead, and the family rests in their hard-won warmth, let's step out again. But this time, let's not just list the differences in geography or culture. Instead, let's look at how the same winter, the same unrelenting, impartial cold, shaped the Christmas experience for everyone, no matter who they were. Because while traditions varied, the question remained the same for the millionaire, the immigrant and the enslaved laborer alike. How do we endure this season? In the crowded tenements of New York City, the cold was a thief. It stole through the thin, uninsulated walls of crowded apartments where Irish and German immigrants huddled together. For them, there was no roaring fireplace, only a small coal stove that cost precious wages to feed. Their silent caregivers were the mothers who wrapped hot bricks in rags to put in their children's beds, or the fathers who worked extra shifts on the freezing docks to buy a single festive meal. Here, the lack of heat was a constant reminder of their fragility. A merry Christmas in the slums was often just a day where the struggle was paused, where a church charity provided a hot meal and where the warmth of bodies packed into a small room was the only defense against the draft. Move south to the great plantations. Here the cold revealed the brutal architecture of inequality. In the big house, the master's family celebrated with roaring fires in every room, with imported wines and feasts that lasted for days. But in the slave quarters, the cold was an uninvited guest that slipped through the cracks of rough wooden cabins. For enslaved families, Christmas was a complex, bittersweet season. It was often a time of temporary rest, a few days where the labor stopped. But the warmth they created was an act of profound spiritual resistance. They gathered around small fires, sharing food they had grown in their own small plots or hunted in the woods. They sang spirituals that spoke of freedom and a home beyond this world. Their celebration was a defiance of their condition. To find joy, to share love, to keep a fire burning when the world wanted to treat you as property that was the ultimate winter survival skill. Travel west to the lonely military forts on the Great Plains. Here the cold was a prison warden. Soldiers miles from home spent Christmas in isolation, surrounded by a vast frozen emptiness. Their Christmas was often just a slightly better ration, perhaps a saved bottle of whiskey or a song sung into the howling wind. Diaries from these forts speak of a crushing loneliness where the physical cold mirrored the emotional distance from loved ones. A soldier writing a letter by a flickering candle, his hand shaking from the chill, was trying to bridge that distance, trying to send a spark of warmth across 1,000 miles of snow. And what of the indigenous peoples whose lands were being encroached upon? For many tribes, winter was not a holiday season, but a time of quiet endurance, of storytelling, of living off the stores gathered in the autumn. The arrival of settlers brought new diseases and displacement, making the winter even harder to survive. For those who had converted to Christianity, Christmas became a blend of new faith and old ways. But for all, the winter was a time to draw inward, to rely on the community, to respect the power of the natural world that could freeze a man in his tracks if he showed disrespect. Do you see the thread connecting them all? It isn't the decorations. It isn't the presents. It is the defiance of the cold. Whether it was a wealthy family lighting a gas lamp, a pioneer burning a buffalo chip, or a tenement family sharing a blanket, everyone was engaged in the same primal act, pushing back the entropy of winter. Christmas became the marker of this defiance. It was the flag planted in the snow that said, "We are still here. The cold has not taken us yet. The light is fading now. It's perhaps 4:30 in the afternoon, but winter evening comes early, and the grey sky outside the windows is darkening toward black. The snow that's been falling all day has accumulated, smoothing every rough edge of the landscape, muffling every sound, creating a world that feels both smaller and more infinite at the same time. Inside, the fire burns low. The family has eaten their Christmas dinner, modest but satisfying. The gifts have been given and received. The children played with their toys for hours, that complete absorption that children are capable of, lost in imaginary worlds. Now they're getting tired, their energy winding down as the day winds down. The father adds another log to the fire, not a large one, just enough to maintain warmth through the evening. He's conscious of the woodpile outside, of how much remains, of how many weeks of winter still stretch ahead. Every log is a calculation, a balance between comfort now and survival later. But it's Christmas. He allows himself to be slightly generous to build the fire up, just enough that everyone can gather around it in real comfort, rather than just barely sufficient warmth. The mother brings out her spinning wheel. She's not working frantically, not trying to accomplish a specific amount. She's just doing something with her hands, letting the familiar rhythm soothe her. The wheel turns the wool feeds through her fingers, twisting into yarn. It's meditative, this work. The gentle whir of the wheel, the slight tug of the fibre, the slow accumulation of spun yarn on the spindle. She's been spinning wool since she was a child. Her mother taught her, and her grandmother taught her mother, going back generations. In the motion of her hands in the turn of the wheel, she's connected to all those women who came before, who also sat by winter fires and spun, who also made it through countless winters, who also celebrated countless Christmases in hardship and hope. There is a comfort in this continuity. She knows that just as the wheel turns, the seasons will turn. Winter will give way to spring. Hardship will give way to plenty. Her labor is an act of optimism, a belief in the future. The father picks up a piece of wood and his carving knife. He's making nothing in particular, just letting the knife follow the grain, peeling away thin curls of pale wood that fall onto his lap. The smell of fresh cut wood mingles with the smoke and the smell of the dying day's cooking. He's thinking about his own father dead these 10 years, about the Christmas they used to have when he was a boy, about how the old man would tell stories that went on for hours, stories that he wishes he'd paid more attention to so he could pass them on to his own children. The children are curled together near the fire, drowsy. The youngest has her wooden horse, holding it close like a talisman. The boy is turning his new knife over in his hands, studying it, imagining the things he'll do with it. They're content, these children. They don't know to compare their Christmas with some hypothetical, richer, more elaborate Christmas. This is the only Christmas they know, and it's enough. They're warm, they're fed, they're loved, and they're together. That's everything. As full dark arrives, the father reads again from the Bible, but something different this time. He turns to Ecclesiastes. To everything, there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. The words hang in the air. Everyone knows this passage, has heard it dozens of times, but tonight it resonates differently. A time to plant and a time to pluck up. They're in the fallow time now, the time when nothing grows, when the earth sleeps under snow. But the spring will come. The planting time will return. This winter, as hard as it is just a season. It will pass. The mother begins to hum soft and low a melody without words at first, then gradually forming into a song they all know. It's an old hymn, one that speaks of traveling through a weary land, of seeking a better home. The others join in their voices, blending in the small room. They're not great singers. They're just people tired from a day of moderate celebration in the midst of prolonged hardship. But their voices together create something beautiful, something that transcends the individual parts. As they sing, let's think about what this day has meant. Not the grand gestures, not the things that would make it into paintings or literature, but the small acts that compose it. A father rising in darkness to rekindle a fire, protecting his family from cold without being asked or thanked. A mother rationing flour and fat to make cookies, spending reserves carefully to create a moment of sweetness. Children learning that gifts don't have to be plentiful to be precious, that love can be expressed in carved wood and knitted wool. Neighbors walking through snow to be together because isolation is dangerous and community is survival. All of these are acts of love, but they're also acts of resistance. Resistance against the cold, resistance against the dark, resistance against the forces that would grind them down and make them give up. Christmas in 1800s, America at its best. Was this a collective decision to remain human, remain connected, remain hopeful even when everything logical said you should just hunker down and endure? The carol ends. The fire crackles quietly. Outside, the wind has picked back up, not as fierce as yesterday, but present audible a reminder that winter isn't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. There are months still to go, weeks and weeks of cold and dark and careful survival. February will be worse than December. March will bring thaws that freeze again, turning the world into treacherous ice. April will tease with warmth that doesn't last. But they've made it to Christmas. That's an achievement. And they'll make it beyond Christmas day by day, log by log, meal by meal, until finally the real thaw comes and stays until the ice breaks on the creek, until the first green things start to push through the earth, until they can open the door without the cold knifing in. As the family prepares for bed, the familiar routine unfolds. Everyone uses the chamber pot because going outside to the privy in this cold is genuinely dangerous. Faces are washed with water warmed by the fire. Night clothes are pulled on under day clothes for modesty, then day clothes are removed. The children are tucked into their pallet near the fire. The parents move to their bed against the wall. The fire is banked, covered in ash to preserve the coals through the night. And then, in the darkness, the mother begins to sing again, very softly, a lullaby. Not a Christmas song, just a simple tune about sleep and rest and safety. Her voice is the last thing everyone hears as the consciousness fades, as sleep takes them one by one. The room grows quiet. The fire glows red beneath its blanket of ash. Outside, snow continues to fall, adding to the already deep drifts, sealing them in, making the house an island in a sea of white. But inside, 6 people sleep, their breath steaming in the cold air, their bodies warm beneath quilts, their dreams carrying them to places where it's always summer, always warm, always easy. Christmas is over. Winter continues. The cold that reveals warmth has revealed it today in carved horses and knitted socks and neighbors who came through snow. But the cold remains as it must, as it always does. That's the lesson. Warmth is never permanent. It has to be created, maintained, fought for, earned. But the fight is worth it. Because in the warmth, however brief, we find our humanity. And that's enough. That has to be enough. Because winter doesn't care about our needs. Winter is neutral, implacable, inevitable. What matters is what we do within winter, how we respond, how we care for each other, how we create light in darkness and warmth in cold. This family will wake tomorrow, and the work will resume. The survival will continue. But they'll have this memory, this Christmas, this day, when things were slightly better, slightly warmer, slightly easier. And that memory will sustain them through the cold weeks ahead, will remind them why they endure. We've traveled a long way tonight, you and I. We've walked through cold that would freeze unprotected skin, through hardships that most of us will never have to face. We've seen how people in another era, in another America, survived winter and celebrated Christmas, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Because they were human, and humans need more than just survival. We need meaning. We need connection. We need to mark the passage of time with moments that matter. The snow is still falling on that Pennsylvania farmhouse. The fire still glows. The family still sleeps. And you, wherever you are in your warm bed, in your safe space, you can appreciate what you have, because you've glimpsed what others endured. You can understand that comfort is never guaranteed, that warmth must be earned, that every cozy moment you experience is the result of systems and work and energy that you usually take for granted. But you can also understand something else, that the human capacity for kindness, for resilience, for creating warmth in cold places hasn't changed. That the same spirit that kept that family alive in 1848 still exists in you, in all of us. That when times are hard, when things are difficult, when winter comes in, whatever form it takes in your life, you have within you the same strength they had, the ability to keep going, the ability to find small joys in hard times, the ability to care for others even when you're struggling yourself. That's the real gift of looking back at history to fall asleep to. Not just the interesting facts, not just the sensory details, but the recognition that we're not so different from those who came before. We face different challenges, certainly. We have different tools. But the fundamental questions remain the same. How do we survive? How do we stay human? How do we create warmth when everything is cold? And the answers, imperfect and incomplete as they are, remain the same too. Through work, through community, through small acts of care, through persistence, through the quiet determination to see another dawn, another spring, another Christmas. Let yourself drift now. Let the images fade. The Pennsylvania farmhouse, the family sleeping by the banked fire, the snow falling endlessly outside, all of it can recede into comfortable distance. You're back in your own space, now your own time, but you carry something with you, a deeper appreciation perhaps, a different perspective, a sense of connection to those who came before and struggled and survived, and somehow found reasons to celebrate even when celebration seemed impossible. Sleep well, rest deeply. And if you wake in the night, perhaps think for a moment about all the nights humans have woken, tended fires, checked on children, pulled blankets closer, and returned to sleep. You're part of that endless chain, that continuity of survival and care and hope. Winter comes for everyone eventually, but so does spring. The fire has burned down to embers now, and we've come to the end of our journey through this winter's night in history. I hope you found something here, something restful, something that gave you a glimpse into lives lived simply but fully, into Christmases that were about survival as much as celebration, into the winter survival skills that kept families alive when the cold came and stayed and stayed. Christmas in 19th century America wasn't the glossy holiday we know today. It was harder, rougher, more precarious. But it was also in its way more meaningful, because nothing was taken for granted. Every warm moment was earned. Every shared meal was a small victory. Every day survived was a reason for gratitude. As you drift towards sleep, now maybe you can take a moment to feel grateful for your own warmth, your own safety, your own comfort. It's easy to forget how remarkable these things are, how much human ingenuity and effort has gone into creating the world we live in now. But our ancestors knew. They knew because they didn't have it. They fought for warmth every day, and sometimes they lost that fight. But they never stopped fighting it. And that persistence, that refusal to let the cold win, is the legacy they have left for us. It lives in our DNA, a quiet reminder that we are built to endure, built to find light in the dark, built to love even when the world is frozen. If this journey through the past brought you some peace, if it helped quiet your mind or ease you toward rest, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like on this video. And if you'd like to take more journeys like this, to explore more moments in history where life was hard, but humans persevered, please subscribe. We're building a community here of people who find comfort in the past, who understand that history isn't just facts and dates, but the lived experience of people who felt cold, and warmth, hunger and satisfaction, fear and hope, just like we do. Thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for trusting me to guide you through this story. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I hope you sleep well. I hope you dream peacefully. And I hope that when you wake, you carry with you some small ember of the resilience and kindness that kept those long-ago families alive through winters that seemed endless. The past has so much to teach us, not just about history, but about ourselves, about what we're capable of, about what matters. And remember, the cold of 1848 is not gone. It has just changed form. We all have our winter seasons of loss, of isolation, of scarcity. But we also have the same tools, the ability to build a fire, whether literal or metaphorical, the ability to reach out a hand, the ability to endure. Rest now. Let the story fade. Let the warmth of your own bed hold you. And know that in some small way you're connected to everyone who ever sought warmth in winter, who ever found it, who ever shared it with those they loved. Good night. Sleep well, and thank you for being here.